My name is Daniel Fiverson. Welcome to this special edition of the Astrological Weather Report. Today, I would like to discuss the current influences of Eris and the outer planets. In particular, I'm going to talk about Eris's interaction with Uranus and Pluto, because it is my firm belief that these three great outer cycles are behind all the chaos and discord that we have experienced, not just this year, but for most of this century. Regardless of which part of the country we live in, we can all relate to the experiences of having observed all of the changes that have occurred in our neighborhoods, our towns, and our states over the last couple of decades. We are all living through these disruptions to our normalcy together. These upheavals are the homeopathic remedies for our cultural illnesses. We grow through crisis. Change is the only constant. Evolution is not a theory, it's a fact. So who is Eris? In 2005, a team at the Palomar Observatory in Palo Alto, California, led by American astronomer Mike Brown, reported the discovery of a planet orbiting in the Kuiper Belt, out beyond the orbit of Neptune, a planet that was as large or larger than Pluto. This contentious celestial body was destined to shake up both of the world of astronomy and astrology alike. What we're going to look at as I move through this talk is these three outer planet cycles: the Uranus to Pluto cycle, the Uranus to Eris cycle, and the Pluto to Eris cycle. The current Uranus and Pluto cycle began in the 1960s. From 2012 to 2015, Uranus, the planet of evolution, and Pluto, the planet of Uranus, the planet of revolution, and Pluto, the planet of evolution, squared 7 times. In 2016, Uranus conjoined Eris for the second time in this century. And in 2020, Pluto perfected to a square to Eris that has not occurred in 2,700 years. And you can see here, just with these visual references of the things that we have experienced over the past 50 years or so. So when Eris was first discovered, she actually eluded detection. She was discovered officially in 2006, but in 2005, early 2005, she was spotted in the sky by Mike Brown and his team, but she was thought to be a fixed star because of her 500-year orbit, which creeps along at a snail's pace. She didn't seem to move. 2 years later, when Sedna was identified, it was observed that Eris had moved. And this graphic shows you the distance up here that Eris has moved from where she was originally discovered. She was originally observed to be about the same size as Pluto, and she was considered to be at the time the 10th planet. She was named Xena, which was the informal name that was used internally by the discovery team, but that was later changed to conform with the Greco-Roman nomenclature that is assigned to celestial bodies. Now, the word planet comes from the Greek word that means wanderer, as the stars were seen to wander across the sky. This was the only definition of the planet for thousands of years. In 2006, that all changed. There was concern by the astronomers that there would be other trans-Neptunian objects of similar size to Eris that would be discovered, which motivated the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, to define the term planet for the first time. There were also uncertainties about whether the object would be classified as a planet or a minor planet. Because Eris was initially thought to be larger than Pluto, it was then described as the 10th planet. In response to the uncertainty over its status, the IAU delegated a group of astronomers to develop a sufficiently precise definition of what a planet was, which was adopted in August of 2006. And under the IAU definition, Eris became a dwarf planet along with Pluto. And in the case of Pluto, a classification, in my opinion, remains very controversial. At the same time, Ceres, with her almost perfectly round shape, was promoted in status and reclassified as a dwarf planet as well, along with Haumea, Makemake, and Sedna. The number of known planets in the solar system reverted back to 8, the same as before Pluto was discovered in 1930. Just as an aside, it has been suggested, according to the Bode's laws, which determine the location and the distance of planets from the sun, there should be a planet orbiting between Mars and Jupiter. Ceres is the core, is suggested that Ceres is the core of that planet because of her perfectly round shape. There are also massive scars across the face of Mars that have been difficult to explain. Vedic scripture describes a great war in the sky between the gods. This is just some interesting food for thought. So Eris was born in controversy. Her discovery alone reflects the discord in the astronomical community caused by the debate over the object and Pluto's classification, and reflect her nature and astrological dynamics. Observation and correlation of Eris and Pluto, what we've known about Pluto, lead me to conclude that neither Eris nor Pluto is worth anything. So the most of the mythology that we know about Eris comes from Hesiod, and it comes from Homer. In Hesiod, in his works and days, he described her birth, that she was born from Nyx, which is the night. And Nyx was the second level, really, the first level of primordial beings, primordial goddesses, gods and goddesses after chaos. So Eris is right up there before the Olympians and the Titans. She gave birth to the goddess and goddesses whose English names were toil, forgetfulness, starvation, pains, fightings and battles, murders, mass slaughters, quarrels, lies, disputes, and lawlessness. Dysnomia is her moon, and lawlessness, I think, is a theme that we can all agree has been threaded through our recent history. And Ate, ruin. Oath, who does more damage than any other to earthly men when anyone of his knowledge swears to a false oath. And he goes on to offer another perspective as well, though. He says, it was never true that there was only one Eris. There have always been two on earth. There is one you could like when you understand her. The other is hateful. The two Erites have separate natures. There is one Eris who builds up evil war and slaughter. She is harsh. No man loves her. But under compulsion or by will of the immortals, men promote this rough Eris. But the other one is born the elder daughter of Black Nyx. She is far kinder. She pushes the shiftless man to work for all his laziness. A man looks at his neighbor who is rich, then he too wants work. For the rich man presses on with his plowing and planting and ordering of his estate. So the neighbor envies the neighbor who presses on towards wealth. Such Eris is a good friend to mortals. Homer had a few things to say in the Iliad as well. He used the name Enyo, which is another name that was assigned to her, as the sacker of cities, a strife whose wrath is relentless. She is the sister and companion of murderous Eris, and she is only a little thing at first, but thereafter grows until she strives on the earth with her head held striking heaven. She then hurled down bitterness equally between both sides as she walked through the onslaught, making men's pain heavier. And here he's describing how Eris really was the cheer team, along with Pallas Athena, how the two of them cheered on both sides of the Trojan War into battle. And he continues, when baleful Eris, sent by Jove, Jupiter's command, the torch of discord blazing in her hand, through the red skies her bloody sign extends, and wrapped in tempests o'er the fleet descends. High in Ulysses' bark her horrid stand, she took and thundered through the seas and land. And this is a 19th century, a 19th century drawing that actually describes this scene. And I failed to find the attribute who it's attributed to, but it clearly relates to this quote. So the most familiar story with Eris is her culpability for instigating the Trojan War. And the story goes that Zeus held a banquet in the celebration of the marriage and the future parents of Achilles. However, Chiron, who sent the invitations, disliked Eris and snubbed her, actually expressing his wounding nature. Chiron, who sent the invitations, disliked her. Eris showed up anyway and tossed into the wedding party a golden apple inscribed to the fairest, igniting a contest between Hera, Pallas Athena, and Aphrodite. Paris, the son of Priam, who was the king of Troy, was chosen to be the judge. Each goddess offered Paris a gift if they were chosen. Hera promised him great power. Pallas Athena offered him great wisdom. It was Aphrodite who offered him beauty. Paris chose Aphrodite, not surprisingly, who rewarded him with Helen, the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. So Paris abducted Helen and took her off to Troy, the event that is described by Christopher Marlowe in Dr. Faustus as was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium. Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. But the story doesn't end here, because there was a member of the Trojan royal family named Aeneas. You're probably familiar with his name. He's very well known through mythology. And he was of the royal family, and he sailed to Italy from Troy at the end of the war. And he is known for having founded the Roman Empire, which has lasted 1,000 years and whose vestiges remain to this day. So we see that perhaps the outcome of Eris's golden apple was not necessarily the Trojan War. It was the Trojan War which instigated or encouraged or catalyzed the beginning of the Roman Empire. So one thing leads to another, and we can't always assume that chaos and discord are necessarily wrong or bad or counterproductive to our evolutionary path. In truth, they may actually be the catalyst that, like Uranus, shatters us, upsets us, shakes us, and requires us to move on. So, was it the golden apple that started the Trojan War, or was it the face that launched 1,000 ships? There are a number of other side stories, side anecdotal stories about Helen. There's one that she taunted the Greek soldiers when they were hiding within the Trojan horse by mimicking the sounds and the voices of their wives, kind of trying to distract them, encouraging them perhaps to return to Greece. And then Euripides in his play Helen also suggests that the Helen that was abducted and taken to Troy was merely a phantom, that the true Helen never really left Greece. So there are a number of other things that swirl around. And we have to remember that these stories that come to us from all these thousands of years ago are no different than something that we watch on Netflix. They are written to attract an audience. It was the popular entertainment of the day, if you would. And it's very possible that some of these stories, including Homer's writing, were really written to attract an audience rather than to perpetuate or to speak to some truth of what happened. So let's look at the astronomy of Eris for a minute. This is a chart drawing which shows you the orbits of the outer planets and around the Kuiper belt. Pluto was the first planet that was discovered in the Kuiper belt, and then Sedna and Eris beyond it. They're called trans-Neptunian objects, because they are out past the orbit of Neptune. And you can see that at one part of her orbit, Neptune actually is out beyond Pluto, and we can actually consider her to be more distant, but Pluto does go out even further. So you can see here the highly elliptical nature of her orbit. She's twice the distance from the sun as Pluto, and it takes her 500 years to complete this orbit. This is a chart that I calculated a few years back using 5 Eris cycles. And it shows that the time that she spends in each of the signs varies greatly because of the elliptical nature of the orbit itself. And so in Aries, she spends over 120 years and almost that long also in Taurus, and in Pisces and in Aquarius. And she moves from Gemini through to Capricorn relatively quickly. And we're going to see how that plays out. It's a quite important factor. So let's just briefly look at the archetypes of these of Uranus and Pluto, in addition to Eris, because these are the cycles we're going to be examining. Excuse me. Aquarius and Uranus represent liberation from conditioning patterns. The parental, societal, past life memories. We are like onions. We have layers and layers of conditioning that are overlaid on us at birth and as we age. And it's our gender, it's our society, it's our family values, it's our friends, our peer groups, the area, the country we grew up in, the very country that we grew up in. All of these things are religion. All of these things lay conditioning over us, and this is all set up for us in Capricorn and into form and structure. For we become crystallized into these conditioned beliefs and understandings. It's Aquarius and Uranus is dynamic to liberate us from all that conditioning. It correlates to our subconscious, our individuated unconscious, that part of us which lies below the surface that really is our true self. That holds the repository of all of our emotional experiences from before, and is the formative space for everything that appears above the surface. It represents rebellion against the known and the limitations of society and consensus reality. Uranus is the individuation process itself and represents the individuated state. The majority of people conform to society's standards because it provides the way for dealing with the Cancerian insecurity, the moon. Uranus and Aquarius frees us from the need to find security through conforming to someone else's someone else's values and standards, society's values. People who demonstrate the courage to individuate change the nurture of their attraction function, which is Venus. Venus is magnetism, and begins attracting like-minded souls. The location of Uranus and Aquarius in the birth chart shows the ways in which the soul intends to liberate in this lifetime. Uranus forms the dynamic as the purpose of shattering those crystallized forms and structures that are set up in Capricorn. It creates disruptions and interruptions that generate sudden and unexpected events, which in turn cause trauma. It correlates to our individuality and the individuation process itself as defined by Carl Jung. And it is genius. It is the higher mind as opposed to Mercury, the lower mind. It's Promethean. It's forward-looking, which is a concept and a mythic archetype that was introduced by Rick Tardis. But it's also important to understand that Uranus has only recently been the ruler of Aquarius since 1781, for thousands of years before it was Saturn. And many astrologers still consider Saturn to be a co-ruler of Aquarius, in some cases the only ruler of Aquarius. And what seems to be observed, again, through observation and correlation, is that 1/3 of the people, of the population at any time, are progressive, are forward thinking, want things to change, to go forward, to be better for themselves and their family in all of the ways, spiritually and materially, physically, mentally, and health-wise. But 1/3 also want things to change by going back to the way that they used to be, to find that security and safety of the known. And then there's 1/3 in the middle, which are often just on the fence. Aquarius and Uranus are technology, because Prometheus stole fire from Zeus and gave it to man. Man was his progeny, was his creation. And fire was a technology. He taught man how to cook their food, which was a huge evolutionary leap forward. And it is also electricity, just as Venus is magnetism, Uranus is electricity, and it relates to electronics and computers, which are also electrical technology. So Pluto is we know as the evolutionary engine. It's the undercurrent that keeps driving us forward. It takes us to the wall that represents the challenges which we have been unable to overcome on our own, and it says to us, you're going to go over that wall. Do you want to go head first or feet first? But you're going either way. It's the repository of what came before, our DNA, our ancestral patterning, our karma. And in EA, it is the primary evolutionary karmic axis, the core foundation. And the way that we determine what that foundation looks like is by examining the location of the south node of the moon by house and sign, the location of the planetary ruler of the lunar south node by sign, house, and aspects to other planets, the location of the north node of the moon by house and sign, and Pluto's polarity point, which is its opposite point, polarized. If your Pluto is in Leo, your polarity point is in Aquarius, the other side of your chart. The location of its planetary ruler of the lunar north node by its own house sign and aspects. All of this correlates to the root structure of any birth chart. Everything is referred to that context, that evolutionary karmic axis. So due to its 500-year highly elliptical orbit, Eris transits through the sign of Aries for 120 plus years. It is her brother's sign. Remember, I said she was the brother of Eris in one mythological story. Well, she's very comfortable in his house for that length of time. She spends more time there, or as much time there as the only other sign is Pisces. Now, the last Uranus-Eris conjunction 500 years ago occurred from 1426 to 1516. And these were the years when Joan of Arc valiantly took up arms as a woman to defend France from English occupation, in the end losing her own life but being canonized for her courage. In Italy, the Medicis facilitated the emergence of the Renaissance as Florence became the center of arts and learning. On the other side of the spectrum, in its shadow, the Spanish Inquisition sought to cleanse and purify religious expression and practice throughout Europe. And the conquistadors explored Mexico and the American Southwest and caused the genocide of the indigenous population, not just through warfare, but mostly as a result of European diseases, Eurasian diseases. At the same time, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. Leonardo da Vinci created his masterworks. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. Martin Luther listed his 95 theses. Columbus discovered America. The entire New World was discovered. Teresa of Avila was born. And the boundaries of the sovereign domestic domain, but tongue-tied today, dynastic domains were displaced or dissolved, fracturing the coagulated patriarchal ascendancy of the Middle Ages and opening the space for the new thought that was already birthing as the Renaissance. This is the reflection of how Eris can wreak havoc in the world, but also express as highly creative individualism, which generate breakout and breakthrough events. The 84-year cycle of Uranus allows for 2 conjunctions to Eris in each of her Aries 500-year-long transits. And this first conjunction came in 1927 as Eris entered Aries. Uranus conjoined Eris 2 years later. It precipitated the New York stock market crash and the Great Depression. Adolf Hitler and fascism rose to power in Germany, Italy, and Spain. World War II erupted as Germany invaded Poland and the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The last quarter square from Uranus to Eris occurred from 1922 to 1993. They say 1992 to 1993. We had the first bombing of the World Trade Center, which foreshadowed 9/11. And there was increased government surveillance and data collection. The Waco Siege occurred, which was a 52-day standoff between the Branch Davidians led by David Koresh, and their defiance in the face of absolute authority is one of the traits of Eris and reflects how Eris defied Zeus and disrupted the wedding plans he had made. And the fire that ended that violent episode clearly reflects the expression of Eris through the fire-drenched sign of Aries. We also had the Northridge earthquake, which devastated the San Fernando Valley near Los Angeles. It only lasted 10 to 15 seconds, but it was the highest ever instrumentally recorded earthquake in an urban area in North America. Eris is known for her ability to shock us into submission and awareness. And on April 9th, 1995, American terrorists perpetrated the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people and injured almost 700 and destroyed the Murrah Federal Building. Terrorism and anarchy are two of Eris's signatures. Last but not least, Uranus and Eris conjoined again from 2016 to 2017, and Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And this presidential tenure is a timeline of presidential lawlessness, inciting provocation, and unabashed fraudulent behavior and deceit that is unparalleled in 250 years of American history. This is the modus operandi of Eris. Uranus and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto conjoined in the 1960s. Perhaps you were there and you remember it. Timothy Leary told us if we were there, really there, we don't remember it. So this is a recap of what happened. We had the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War and anti-war protests. Woodstock occurred. Assassinations of JFK, RFK, and MLK, who, in my opinion, were the next three personages who could have been president of the United States. Rock music emerged. You had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we came within a hair's breadth of a nuclear holocaust. ARPANET was founded. ARPANET was the first configuration of a global network that preceded the World Wide Web that connected hospitals, universities, and the government in the event of some kind of national disaster. It evolved into the World Wide Web that we know today. And Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space, and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. From 2012 to 2015, Uranus and Pluto squared 7 times. This was just a couple of years ago. We had 25 terrorist attacks, 12 coups d'etats, 25 assassinations or attempted assassinations, 21 air disasters, and 10 major hurricanes and cyclones worldwide. And this is Neil Armstrong's footprint on the moon. Eris demonstrates her prowess and potential to disrupt anything that has resisted all other attempts at peaceful resolution. Her reputation has enshrined her as the goddess responsible for the bloodlust of the Trojan War. Her mythology and history, however, suggest a much more upbeat outcome. Her archetypal potential correlates to the rectification of circumstances that have found no other disentanglement. All of the disruptive and chaotic events that have been described by Eris are brought to bear. Chaos, disorder, violence, pain, and lawlessness are blended in crisis mode with Pluto's proclivity for providing cataclysm. Many important figures, though, throughout history have had Eris, prominent in their charts. All of the people on this list had a connection between their sun and Eris. And you can see there's some pretty genius, creative, important people who have lived through the centuries who had this aspect in their chart. Down at the bottom, you can see it also includes Joseph McCarthy and the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s. L. Ron Hubbard, whose creations are somewhat questionable, and Charles Manson, who was one of the worst individuals in American history. So if we look at Pluto and Eris, the current cycle between Pluto and Eris began in Sagittarius in 1756. And during those years, the 7 Years' War between England and France spilled over into North America as the French and Indian War, as the European powers fought for control of the colonies. And this was a major watershed in American history. It was the beginning of self-reliance and independence for the 13 colonies, because with the end of the war, the belligerent French and the indigenous tribes subsided. And with their lives now feeling secure, the colonists began to realize that perhaps they no longer had any need for protection from the British. And at the same time, under the Sagittarian transit, an evangelical movement swept the colony in these years, spreading Puritanism and its narrow view of humanity and the degradation of women especially. Their Puritan beliefs were based on the principle that an intermediary was needed for connection to divinity, and membership in the community required a covenant with God as interpreted by the Puritan leaders, and failure to adhere to that covenant brought the threats of damnation, fire, and brimstone. And witchcraft was the bugaboo of the time, and it was often identified simply by gender, mostly women, by the way you dressed, your age, being childless, taking sexual liberties, guilt by association, and even if you were left-handed. A little known fact is that in the 1750s, one half of the colonial population were slaves and indentured servants. Indentured servants were individuals who could not afford to pay for their own passage to the New World, and so they signed a contract with someone who sponsored them. That when they came here, they would work off their passage as an indentured servant, and actually at some point, if they were able to, be able to buy their freedom. Slaves were never able to buy their freedom. They were brought here unwillingly in chains and kept in chains or in the cotton fields for most of their lives. As the agrarian economy of the southern colonies expanded, the need for slave labor mushroomed and it became institutionalized. And it increased exponentially again with the invention of the cotton gin, as cotton became a major international trade asset. By the mid-1770s, there were 500,000 Negro slaves in North America. It was 1/5 of the population who were somebody else's property. Since 2017, Pluto in Capricorn has formed a last quarter square to Eris and Aries. And this event has not occurred in 2,700 years, since 691 to 621 before the Common Era during the Axial Age. During that time, many of the great thought streams of Western civilization came onto the planet. Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu were in China. The Upanishads was begun to be written in India. Pythagoras, Homer, and Plato were in Greece, and Isaiah was in the Middle East. In 2020, we're all very familiar with this, we had the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto and COVID-19. We had the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn, and Jupiter and Pluto squared 3 times. Now, those things happen on a regular basis, but we also had Saturn squaring Eris, and Jupiter and Pluto each squared Eris 3 times. The outer planets in Capricorn all squared Eris last year multiple times, and it's the Pluto squares which, in my opinion, are the most significant. 2021 began with the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, and Pluto and Eris perfected in 2021 will perfect in 2021 with 2 more perfections this year in July and October. Eris is the grain of sand in the oyster that transforms into an exquisite pearl. Chaos has the function of deconditioning what has become crystallized, allowing the creation of new form. Discomfort dislodges emotional inertia, compelling action. When expressed peacefully as conflict can become unity where there was only duality. The divergent and separate become similar and connected. So the other major event that's happening right now are the Pluto returning to its point of during the American Revolution when the country was born, and Neptune returning to an opposition which has only occurred once, which was during the American Civil War. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And both of these conflicts were watershed events in American history. And they're both right now occurring simultaneously. And you can see in this chart how this is set up. This grand square, mutable grand cross, has been in the sky since August. and it overlays the US chart. And as an aside, I just point out that I use a chart for the United States from the moment that was recorded in the journals of the Continental Congress, that the Congress declared war on England, which from where I sit, when a colony declares war on its mother country, they cease to be a colony and by default become a sovereign nation. It's the only one of the US charts that actually has a documented time, a date and time. The others are all speculation and rectifications. All of the charts work. In my opinion, the Sibley chart, which is valid, I'm not saying it's not valid or that one chart's good and the others are bad. But the Sibley chart, from my perspective, was the country's first birthday. After a year at war with the most powerful military force on the planet, England, the founding fathers finally had the confidence to announce publicly that the colonies were now a free and independent state. I think that that's the way it played out. So at any rate, this is the chart for January 6th, the Capitol riot, and the US chart, and you can see what is set up here. We are currently at the first of the three perfections. It occurred last month in February. A lot of people, the Sibley chart says that these events, the return and the opposition, are at in the future, a year or two. Well, when you line up the orbs of these two transits, which is spread over 3 to 4 years in either direction and either side of the perfection, there is only 1 year difference between the orb spread itself, which means, in other words, that these conditions are already in orb, regardless of what US chart you use. It's in the chart that I have been working with, which in my experience yields a tremendous amount of information. The first US Pluto return has already occurred a month ago. There will be 2 more this year, in July and on Christmas Day of 2021. It's been in orb since 2019, and the Pluto to Pluto conjunction will remain in orb through 2024. And in this chart, it's occurring in the 4th house, which refers to democracy versus authoritarianism. And it's causing and will continue to cause the release of evolutionary dynamics that will precipitate dramatic and long-term changes to the structure of power in the United States. And the sense of who we are as a nation is undergoing radical transformation. A new national authenticity, see, Vesta is conjunct Neptune. A new national authenticity is driven by a commitment to Juno, to what is individually and collectively sacred, is emerging. Transiting Neptune has been in orb of the US opposition to US Neptune since April of 2020, since last year. And the opposition has already perfected twice in May of August of last year. And there is 1 more perfection coming up this month. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it's active even as we speak. Neptune will remain in orb through January of 2022. And this opposition, as I said, occurred in the years leading up to the American Civil War from 1856 to 1858. Pisces and Neptune correlates to the consciousness which pervades all life forms. It's the higher octave of Venus. It's unconditional love as opposed to Venus, which is conditional love, and ultimate truth as opposed to subjective personal truth. And it reflects the extreme political polarization in the United States. The Neptune opposition is causing divisive conflict created by increasing exposure of social, political, and economic polarities. And the mutable Grand Cross by transit to the US chart overlays the Neptune to Neptune opposition. Political and legal lines are drawn in the sand and crossed. So where are we going? What can we expect going forward? Please don't shoot me. I am only the messenger. The only outer planet event that will occur over the next decade is a Uranus-Pluto first quarter trine, which will present opportunities that facilitate sudden and unexpected evolutionary progress. In 2021, Pluto and Eris, as I said, will form two more last quarter squares, generating crises that continue to produce dynamic evolutionary changes. In 2023, Pluto enters Aquarius. We should expect disruptions to consensus reality as we know it, and the advent of radical changes to our way of life. Aquarius is not unicorns. Aquarius is disruptions and interruptions, chaos, trauma, and evolutionary growth, which occurs as a result, individuation, which occurs as a result of those events. In 2025, Uranus will enter Gemini. Every time this transit has occurred, it's an inconvenient truth. The US has been at war. In 1774, during the American Revolution, in 1858, at the Civil War, and in 1941, World War II. In 2025, Neptune enters Aries. This is about the dissolution of the self. Will we stop seeing ourselves as the center of the universe? The Earth is not the center of the solar system, and neither are we. Will we dissolve our separateness and join finally the community of the cosmos? This is the chart for the ingress of Uranus into Gemini, and it's interesting overlay. We see Uranus here in Gemini, and it is ruled by Mercury in Leo. But both of them, that whole foundation, is what underscores Uranus in Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus. And we have Neptune in Aries, ruled by Mars in Virgo. So this implication of this Mars energy here clearly does not bode well in terms of a peaceful passage. I'm reminded of the phrase that says we were never guaranteed a safe landing, but a peace. How does it go? We were never guaranteed a unhazardous passage, but we are guaranteed a safe landing. Now, how do we get there? How can we prepare for the unforeseen? These are the questions we now must begin to ask ourselves. Are you prepared for more severe restrictions to our normalcy if they occur? Are you prepared for more severe shortages of our basic essential needs? Do you have enough food and water and medications and medical supplies, the things that are essential to your survival, to you, your family, and your pets, if there are interruptions to supply chains? Is there a support network available in your local neighborhood or local community to reach out to in time of need, to meet with others in your neighborhood where you can share resources and find companionship and community when things get dicey? Are you healthy enough to survive any new epidemics, pandemics, or other crises? And are the end time predictions and prophecies from so many different sources now converging? We have all chosen to be here now. Each of us has a role to play in the futures that is unfolding, whether it's in raising this generation that's coming on the planet or doing work that's going to support or help heal the events that are happening. The generations coming onto the planet at this time are arriving equipped to meet a different kind of future. Hopi prophecy tells us that the world has been destroyed 3 times. This world is not to be destroyed, but it's dissolving and disappearing even as the 5th world emerges. Hopi prophecy says, when the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people should come onto the earth from many colors, creeds, and classes, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They shall be known as the warriors of the rainbow. There's much more in my the forecast that I have written for the year. We stopped buying calendars in March, but now is not a time to hold up and not want to know what's going to happen astrologically for the rest of the year. This is available in 2 versions on Amazon. It explains why the outer planets have been responsible for the suffering, and it presents these narratives as today through mythology, historical timelines, and reveals the opportunities and remedies for the times that we are continuing to pass through. I do consultations that answer the questions: why am I here? What are my lessons? Who am I? And I produce astrological weather reports on a monthly and daily basis. on my website and on Facebook. Here's how you can reach me at Daniel at evolutionaryastrology.com. I hope to hear from you. I hope that this was meaningful and informative. Namaste. Be safe, be well, be kind.